Hey guys, imagine waking up in ancient Greece. Your day starts not with a morning coffee, but with the curious stares of a dozen other men vying for your attention, all vying for the favor of some powerful, if morally questionable, ruler. Yep, today we're taking a peek behind the marble curtains into what life was really like for a male concubine. Spoiler alert. It's not exactly a Netflix rom-com. Before we dive in, hit like if you enjoy stories that make history way more complicated than your high school textbook. And drop a comment if you've ever wondered what kind of sneaky political games or clandestine pleasure in the cool haze of dawn Lysander was led through the quiet streets of a polis, the morning light casting long shadows on the marble steps of a grand household. He moved softly, aware of the heavy gaze of onlookers and the faint scent of olive oil and baked bread drifting in the air. Inside, tapestries and bronze statuettes adorn the halls, silent witnesses to centuries of human routines. The matriarch, a woman whose face was hidden behind a subtle veil of shadow and light, received him with gentle nods, her voice barely more than a whisper. It was an arrival marked by calm acceptance. Yet, beneath that serenity, simmered a quiet ambiguity about his place here, as both a companion and a possession. As Lysander settled into the household, the everyday rhythm revealed itself, servants quietly polishing cups, the soft clatter of tools, the distant murmur of a conversation that never quite explained itself. He was expected to observe, to listen, and to wait while his status hovered ambiguously between valued confidant and another object on the shelf. The others, either older or more indentured, moved with resigned familiarity, their expressions neutral and uncomplaining. During meals, he watched the shifting dynamics, the patron's laughter, the matriarch's measured gaze, and the silent exchanges between servants, each gesture a reminder of the fragile code that governed their lives here. Irony lingered in the way importance was measured in subtle looks and small favors rather than words. Often, Lysander caught himself lingering on the irony of it all, his role as a prized guest, yet undeniably a piece of property. His presence was both desired and dictated, wrapped in a veneer of fragrant oils and silk fabrics, yet underlain with the slow weight of obligation. The household's quiet conversations sometimes felt like a game of shadows, with unseen prophets' faces blurred by the flickering lamplight, their guidance only hinted at through gestures or distant whispers. The young man found humor in the absurdity that many of his daily tasks, like polishing a bronze lamp or sharpening a quill, seemed trivial in the grand tapestry of power and dependence. There was shared humor in that small human effort to find meaning within already prescribed roles. Gradually, Lysander learned to find calm in the knowing his days flowing into each other with repetitive gestures, soft sounds, and silent pauses. The household's warm tones, the glowing terracotta pots, the gentle clatter of plates created a subdued backdrop to his internal quiet. He began to see the routine as a kind of peace, a space between the uncertain edges of desire and duty. The faces of his companions, with their gentle expressions and mildly humorless gazes, seemed to embody the patience required to survive such days. There was a strange comfort in the slow, measured passage of time, even amid the underlying notion that the line between being valued and being owned was thin and easily blurred. In the stillness of these moments, Lysander reflected on the quiet hum of life within these walls, how history's tired hand had left behind humans caught between affection and ownership, trying to carve small spaces of normalcy. The household's subtle rituals, the measured exchanges, and the blurred faces of prophets all wove together into a tapestry of human imperfection. There was little spectacle, only the gentle acknowledgement that daily life, however mundane, carried its own quiet dignity and humor. And in this soft rhythm of existence, Lysander wondered if the stories we tell ourselves about freedom or fate are simply reflections of our own quiet, ongoing endurance. In the quietude of ancient Greek households, Lysander's daily mornings began with a soft scrape of the wooden door. As he prepared himself for a routine that was as much about discipline as it was about survival. Trained in music and poetry, he learned to pluck the strings of a lyre and memorize verses, the sounds blending into the gentle hum of the household. Dressed in simple woven garments, he moved through his tasks with an understated patience, the cool touch of oil on his skin marking the start of another day. It was a life shaped by silent expectations, pleasing the master, maintaining dignity amid the small chores that reminded him he was both ornamental and service. Sometimes a stray breeze carried laughter from neighboring courtyards, but Lysander's gaze stayed steady, attentive to his own quiet rhythm. It was a routine that seemed endless in its slow, unspoken toil, yet softly contained a quiet dignity beneath the surface of routine chores. As the days stretched onward, the tension of constant performance grew palpable. Lysander found himself adrift between moments of perfunctory joy and unacknowledged frustration. His voice, a little less confident in poetry, his fingers, a little less eager on the strings. The presence of other courtiers, those jealous and watchful, whispered a subtle threat, their eyes often flickering with envy or disdain. The gaze of his master, shadowed behind a veil of indifference or fleeting amusement, pressed down like a weight, never quite allowing him to forget his place. Domestic chores that once seemed trivial now seemed to morph into small, daily reassertions of his role, fetching water, polishing surfaces, arranging cushions, each act a quiet reminder of the power dynamics at play. Irony lingered in the air like an old tune, as Lysander's life became a delicate dance of pleasing and restraint, shaping him in ways he could not quite name. There was a strange humor in the silent, unceasing efforts. How, despite the formality, life persisted in small, mundane gestures. Lysander's routine included a moment of stolen respite to lean against a cool wall, a slightly crooked smile touching his lips as he observed the sharp, polite exchanges of others. His reflection, hidden behind the blurred face of a priest or a figure of reverence, felt more like a shadow than a presence, and he wondered faintly if anyone truly saw him. The careful etiquette, the faint scent of herbs on his hands, the soft sounds of footsteps on the stone floor, all became part of a quiet, almost absurd symphony of daily life. Irony, perhaps, was the only honest thing left, a life of subtle submission dressed in ceremonial grandeur, where each small act concealed a quiet yearning for something unspoken. It was a routine filled with the small humor of the human condition, trying to find dignity in the invisible work. Over time, a calm settled over Lysander's days, a gentle acceptance that life's rhythms held no vast surprises, only fleeting moments of clarity amid the monotony. Morning light filtered softly through open windows, touching the worn but steady hands that brushed threads and strings, and evening brought a quiet sense of completion. The weight of expectation seemed to soften toward an almost peaceful resignation, as if he had learned to carry the small burdens without protest. Sometimes he caught himself smiling at a silent joke, only he understood that life persisted quietly, unremarkably, and yet with its own gentle grace. Neighbors or visitors passing by in the distance might not notice the subtle beauty of this routine, but in its stillness, Lysander found a form of quiet humility, the subtle irony of waiting patiently for recognition, which would perhaps never come, lingered like a faint melody, humming softly in the background. In the end, Lysander's life was a mosaic of small, unremarkable details, an existence woven into the fabric of a distant, slow-moving world. He learned that the dignity of being seen was often a fleeting thing, resting more in internal acceptance than external praise. The blurred faces of prophets and masters in the shadows served as reminders that history tended to forget the small, quiet figures who carried on unseen, silent witnesses to the slow passage of time. As he occasionally paused to listen to the distant sounds of a city winding down, Lysander understood that life's quiet persistence was perhaps its own kind of faith, fragile, yet resilient. And in this quiet, unassuming life, he found a peculiar comfort, the gentle acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest stories were told in the stillness that followed the day's end. In the quiet corners of an ornate Greek household, a young male concubine named Lysander moved through his days with a measured patience, the faint hum of conversations and the soft clang of bronze vessels surrounding him. His existence was marked by routine, a careful balance of service and silence, where safety was often measured by small gestures and the right posture. The household's walls seemed to hold many stories, yet Lysander's world was limited to the delicate dance of circumstances that kept him alive and somewhat comfortable. As he looked across the courtyard at other servants, or listened to distant echoes of overall household gossip, he knew that, beneath the surface, secrets fluttered like moths against the dark. The air was warm, both from the sun and from the fragile trust that kept everything from unraveling too quickly. Life simmered in its quiet, unchanging way. One day, a faint whisper reached Lysander's ears, an overheard fragment of gossip that hinted at looming changes. A fellow slave, who usually kept to himself, confided in a hushed tone about a plot to replace him with another, presumably more compliant, man. The words slipped like shadows along the wind, making Lysander's stomach tighten with a slow, unwelcome tension. Odd meetings with this confidant began to punctuate his days, each one more cautious than the last, as if treading on thin ice. The ironic hum of the household's daily rhythm now felt weighted, the laughter and clatter muted by the quiet fear of discovery. Every glance turned into a cautious survey of the faces around him, each smile or nod layered with unspoken questions and uncertain alliances. The irony of it was almost poetic. These secret gatherings, simple in their purpose, yet loaded with unwritten danger, felt like clandestine scenes from a poorly staged play, all performed beneath the watchful eyes of invisible gods. Lysander found himself contemplating the absurdity. How many such plots had been woven in the shadows? How many alliances had been forged and broken over the course of countless silent nights? The household, once a place of mere servitude, now felt like a vast network of whispered deals that mimicked the grand political machinations outside its walls. His fears grew, yet he kept up the facade, pretending not to notice the subtle signs, glances, that lingered just a bit too long, calm conversations that suddenly grew hushed. The humor was stark, human hopes and fears, tangled up in the same mundane routine, quietly absurd and quietly profound. Eventually, Lysander found moments of calm amid the underlying tension, the household settling into its usual rhythm as if nothing had changed. He continued to perform his duties with careful precision, the weight of suspicion momentarily lifted by the familiar routines, lifting a cup, cleaning a corner, sharing a mundane yet meaningful smile with a fellow servant. In these small acts, there was a strange beauty, the resilience of ordinary life persisting even in the face of uncertainty. He became more observant, watching the subtle shifts in voices and body language, learning to read the unspoken truths woven into daily conversation. His mind quieted, like a lake touched by a gentle breeze, reflecting the slow passage of time and the quiet strength in acceptance. Sometimes the simplest act of patience was the most human thing he could do. In the end, Lysander reflected on the fragile, almost accidental nature of his existence, how easily it could tip from stability into chaos, like a house of cards built on whispers. The household, with all its small daily rituals, contained both shelter and danger, a reminder that human relationships, no matter how mundane, always carried a hint of irony and uncertainty. His story, like many quiet stories, was neither tragic nor victorious, merely a testament to the slow persistence of life's ordinary routines amid the slow churn of shifting power. As he moved through his days, the blurred faces of unseen gods seemed to watch silently, unjudging, perhaps amused at the human folly of secrets and alliances. It was enough to know that in this quiet world, life continued, slow, fragile, quietly human. In the gentle glow of the late afternoon, Lysander moved quietly through the household courtyards, the air thick with the faint scent of olives and brewing wine. His position as a concubine was, in many ways, a quiet ritual, an unremarkable part of a broader, unremarkable household filled with soft murmurs and distant laughter. It was during these ordinary moments that the faint hope of stability lingered, delicate as a thin thread, amidst the daily routines and fleeting scraps of human connection. The master's gaze, often hidden in shadows or blurred by the flickering light, never lingered long enough to reveal much. Still, Lysander knew his place, memorized the subtle signs and unspoken rules etched into the rhythm of their shared days. Life, like the sun drifting behind distant hills, moved slowly and unnoticed, a series of small acts stitched into the quiet fabric of their existence. Then came the festival of Dionysus, when chaos spilled into the streets and the household, a wildness that temporarily unmoored the calm. Drums beat faintly in the background, and the air smelled of fermenting fruit that clung stubbornly to the skin. During the height of the revelry, the master's voice, muffled yet unmistakable, cut sharply through the merriment as he publicly humiliated Lysander, pointing fingers and ridiculing him in front of guests and household members. The moment was disturbingly ordinary, yet painfully poignant, a display of power enacting itself as spectacle, exposing the fragile line between dignity and shame. Lysander's cheeks burned, not from shame alone, but from the strange, unsettling awareness of being seen entirely, vulnerable in the glow of flickering torches. The crowd's laughter blurred with the distant sounds of flutes and clapping. Yet, for Lysander, the world suddenly felt very quiet, as if holding its breath in suspense. Amidst the chaos, a swirl of irony emerged. What was meant to humiliate, in the end, kindled a quiet spark of daring in Lysander's mind. The moment was thick with paradox. The very act that sought to diminish him provoked a small, secret defiance. He clenched his fists, feeling the rough texture of his tunic, as he watched the household's jubilant chaos unfold around him. Wine spilled onto the stone floor. Masked faces contorted in exaggerated mirth, and shadows dancing on the walls. An unspoken question stirred in the core of him. Could he, perhaps, find a way to shift the narrative? Still, the festival's wildness did not wait long to expose its cruel edges, as the master's anger shifted from mockery to glare. Lysander's pulse was steady, the irony quietly settling into the uncomfortable truth of their strained power dynamics. As the night's revelry continued unabated, as dawn approached, the household's mood shifted from riotous celebration to a calmer, more contemplative silence. The echoes of drums and drunken laughter faded into a muted stillness, inviting reflection in the cool morning light. Lysander, sitting apart on a low stone bench, ran a hand slowly through his damp hair, feeling the soft warmth of the rising sun on his face. The tension of the night, with its sharp edges and trembling hope, seemed to dissolve into a gentle acceptance of what was and what might never be. The household's decision about his fate hovered just beyond reach, like the faint horizon light that softened the edges of the familiar cityscape. In this quiet, mundane moment, he observed the slow rhythm of ordinary life, nothing extraordinary, just a brief pause in the endless passage of days. Years later, the story of Lysander and the Dionysian festival remained little more than a whisper, an ordinary detail lost in the vast, slow archive of history, to be quietly remembered. The human imperfections, the small acts of courage and humiliation, all faded into the background of a society that moved on, unbothered by the minor tragedies it had hosted. In the stillness of time, The festival's chaos seemed both far away and strangely familiar, echoing the silent truths about power, vulnerability, and quiet resilience. From that distant moment, it was clear that life carried on changing imperceptibly, one subdued breath at a time, and that even in the depths of chaos, life's gentle, monotonous continuity persisted beyond the horizon of human drama. Lysander's days began quietly, sunlight seeping through the small window of his modest quarters, illuminating the faint dust in the air. Once, he had moved among the grand columns and marble courtyards, a fixture in a life filled with little choice but constant service. His body still remembered the weight of mornings spent responding to the subtle signals of his masters, quiet gestures, imperceptible nods, and the faint scent of oils and perfumes lingering on his skin. But now there was a strange stillness, a pause in the familiar rhythm, as the estate's gates slowly swung closed behind him. The empty corridors echoed a melancholic silence, as if the house itself was reluctant to part with its unseen companion. Outside, Lysander wandered into the agora, where merchants called softly to passing customers and children's laughter mingled with distant footsteps. He watched the vendors arrange their pottery and vegetables, touched the worn carvings on the display tables, and listened to the low hum of life continuing around him, indifferent to his absence. His feet moved slowly, and every familiar sight felt translucent, as if viewed through a fog of memories and unspoken questions. He wondered briefly whether his years of service had simply been a prelude to this quiet exile. The crowded marketplace carried on, oblivious to the man who now moved among the shadows of his past. A faint irony hung in the air as Lysander reflected on his former role, a companion to beauty, yet never truly part of it, a familiar face seen, but never truly known. Across the stony paths, a musician played softly, the melody melancholy and gentle, almost unnoticeable. The tune seemed to parody his own quiet longing. With a half smile, he remembered the glossy curtain of noble life he had once observed from behind. Now just a memory blurred by the sunlight and dust. Some of the vendors glanced at him with mild curiosity, an ex-concubine lost in thought, while others ignored him entirely. The streets, full of life, felt both generous and distant, as if mocking his lingering hope for reintegration or recognition. As the sun dipped lower, Lysander found a small bench beside a quiet, shallow fountain, its water smooth and cool beneath his fingertips. The noise of the agora softened into a gentle hum, inviting a slow sense of calm. He sat with no particular destination, feeling the slow rhythm of his breath align with the fading light. The city's pulse, muted now, seemed to endorse a quiet acceptance, an unspoken nod to the transient nature of social roles and human ambition. The scent of herbs from nearby stalls mingled with the faint touch of evening air, settling over him like a soft blanket. He appreciated the fleeting peace, knowing well enough that neither clarity nor certainty was guaranteed in these moments of suspended time. Later, Lysander's gaze lingered on the blurred, shadowed faces in the distance, their features obscured by the waning light and city noise. His future, like their faces, was blurred, an unknown horizon stretching beyond the firm ground of past servitude. He pondered whether someone might open a door for him again, offering a different kind of purpose, or if he would simply remain a quiet caution, an echo of what once was, forgotten in the slow flow of history. The gentle night settled around him, vast and indifferent, every detail familiar yet ultimately uncertain. In this stillness, he found a strange comfort, a quiet acknowledgement that life's transitions were often unnoticed, like the soft pause before sleep. In the quiet pre-dawn hours of Athens, Lysander stirred beneath a simple woolen blanket, the soft whisper of breath blending into the still air. His small quarters, lighted faintly by the first flush of gray, held a sense of calm that bordered on indifference. He rubbed his eyes and moved sluggishly to sit up, the weight of routine settling over him like a well-worn cloak. Today, as every day, the world outside awaited with predictable rhythms, unfinished chores, distant chatter from the marketplace, and the faint clatter of ceramicware. It was a modest beginning, quietly marking another cycle in a life defined by subtle expectations and silent hierarchies. Lysander rose slowly, his fingers reaching for a tunic that hung limply by the wall, its fabric soft and slightly frayed from frequent use. He smoothed the cloth over his shoulders, mindful of the way his role as a heteros etched itself into each small motion, an invisible thread tying him to a patron whose wealth silently dictated his mornings. Outside, the city stirred into mild activity. A boy dragged a cart past, the scent of bread wafted under the door, and the distant call of vendors echoed like a half-hearted call to order. The quiet tension of social obligation wove itself into these everyday moments, a reminder that beneath Athens' grandeur lay countless routines held together by modest kindness and unspoken rules. As Lysander prepared to leave, he glanced at his reflection in a polished bronze mirror, only to find a blurred face staring back, an anonymous face that symbolized the countless unnamed companions living their small, predictable lives. The clothes he wore, simple yet clean, felt like armor against the unremarkable days. Yet Beneath this calm surface was a faint irony. His role as a heteros, often cherished for companionship, was rooted in transactional expectation, veiled in social grace. Stepping outside, he encountered patrons and peers, voices indistinct and faces shadowed by the golden morning light, each of them performing their expected scripts. Everything moved, quietly and automatically, under the unhurried ticking of the city's indifferent clock. Lysander's steps carried him toward the patron's house, a modest but well-built structure that overlooked the agora. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the sound of faint conversation, and the gentle clink of cups, a ritual of social etiquette that had become as familiar as the morning itself. His patron, a figure whose face remained obscured by shadows and light, greeted him with a nod, speaking softly of affairs and leisure. The day wore on in slow, predictable succession, small exchanges, measured silences, moments punctuated by the soft scraping of utensils or the rustle of scrolls. Here, amid the quiet intricacies of daily duty, the irony of social stratification settled comfortably into routine, each man playing his part with unself-conscious grace. As evening approached, Lysander returned to his quarters, the city's hum lowering into a gentle, almost inaudible lull. He sat quietly, the day's events dissolving into mere moments of reflection, observing the gentle sway of shadows on the wall. The important interactions had been simple, limited to gestures and words devoid of excess. Their silence spoke volumes of lives lived largely in mild restraint. In this calm space, he recognized in the stillness a quiet truth. Everyone, regardless of their social station, moved slowly into the night, their stories blending into an anonymous mosaic of routines, small, imperfect, quietly enduring. And in that, perhaps, lay some subtle peace, or at least gentle resignation. In the slow pace of early mornings at the agora, Lysander moved quietly between vendors and spectators, his face thoughtful but unremarkable, a fleeting blur of calm amid the mingling sounds of barter and whispering. His presence was a gentle thread in the fabric of daily life, listening, observing, waiting for his patron's needs to surface like a distant echo. It was a routine marked by small gestures, tucking a tunic, glancing at the sky, nodding softly at passing merchants, each act blending into the slow, predictable rhythm of the marketplace. The air carried a faint warmth, settling over everything like a well-worn cloth, and Lysander's eyes remained steady, not seeking, but subtly absorbing the ebb and flow around him. In that quiet space, it was possible to sense the unspoken importance of seemingly insignificant roles, such as his, quietly shaping the social tide of the city. as the sun climbed higher, and tensions subtly rippled through the agora, Lysander became aware of a rival behind him, a fellow companion with quick eyes and sharper words, whose smirk hinted at unwelcome competition. The subtle shift in tone, an acknowledging nod turned into a measured stare, marked the moment when the usual ease was interrupted. Small insults flickered like flickering flames between them, disguising a deeper concern, the fragile standing of a hetera's companion, often balanced on such delicate connections. Lysander felt the familiar weight of rivalry, neither heavy nor light, but quietly persistent like a whisper in the background of daily life. Irony hung in the air, one's social influence, so carefully cultivated, could seem so fragile beneath the superficial veneer of civility and rivalry. The irony of the situation was quietly evident. How easily the finely tuned dance of influence could be disturbed by fleeting words and subtle gestures. Lysander's smile became softer, more measured, as he acknowledged the challenge without real anger or frustration. His focus shifted inward, recognizing that the game was less about defeat or victory and more about maintaining a composure, a calm opacity that kept him steady amid the petty squabbles. Around him, the market's familiar sounds resumed their gentle rhythm. A merchant's lute, children's laughter, the distant clatter of pottery, all flowing like a background hum to the quiet human theater unfolding in front of him. It was a rhythm that, despite its simplicity, held a quiet dignity, one that could endure the brief flickers of rivalry without losing balance. Gradually, the tension dissolved into a tranquil stillness as Lysander stepped back into the simplicity of his routine. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and his gaze softened towards the people around him, those moments of subtle conflict, giving way to the long, steady pulse of everyday life. The marketplace felt less like a battleground and more like a shared space where human frailty and dignity existed side by side. Each interaction a small mirror of the transient human condition. Outside the fleeting contests, life continued at its quiet pace, an old woman bargaining for olives, a boy eager to watch a passing poet, the light casting a gentle hue over the scene. It was in these undramatic moments that Lysander found a kind of peace, a reassurance that influence, like everything else, ebbed softly with the passing hours. Later, as the shadows lengthened and the city settled into evening's calm, Lysander paused to reflect on the day's subtle dramas. His thoughts drifted over the delicate social web that held together these small human stories, how easily influence was given and taken, how fleeting status could be amid the hum of daily life. The faces blurred in the waning glow, their expressions friendly, bored, amused each with their own quiet struggles and gentle ironies. The marketplace, now quieter, seemed to whisper that human endeavors, no matter how carefully balanced or subtly challenged, moved forward in their simple, unremarkable way. It was a reminder that influence was often just a gentle ripple, a soft touch on the vast, slow-moving surface of everyday existence. In the quiet hours of daytime, Lysander prepared himself for the evening's symposium, where entertainment and conversation wove through the warm air like familiar threads. His robe was simple but well kept, and he moved slowly, aware of the small routines that marked his social place, serving wine, exchanging smiles with acquaintances, listening to the distant clatter of cups, the gentle hum of voices, and the faint scent of roasted olives filled the space, grounding him in the slow rhythm of a routine he knew well. Though the evening promised leisure, there was always a faint sense of obligation, a subtle recognition that every gesture bore weight in the woven tapestry of Athens' social landscape. As the night deepened, Lysander found himself caught in a swirl of political gossip, voices rising and falling with a hesitant ease. The host's laughter echoed softly, while beneath the surface, sharper words slipped through like thin knives, secret alliances, old rivalries renewed. The delicate balance of conviviality made it difficult to speak freely. Yet Lysander listened with patient endurance, aware that each subtle hint could shift the fragile perceptions that held his reputation steady. Somewhere nearby, a hetera's quiet laughter briefly lifted the mood, reminding him that beneath the veneer of civility, human frailty persisted in every small exchange. Then, quite unexpectedly, a careless remark from a guest, perhaps aimed at someone else, was misheard and turned toward Lysander. The room's mellow glow flickered for a moment, as if the shadows sensed a fracture lurking beneath the surface. The insult was veiled in jest, but carried the weight of underlying disdain, nudging the evening's gentle rhythm into uncertain tension. Lysander's eyes briefly flicked to the speaker's face, which was obscured in shadow, its expression unreadable, almost blurred by the soft light, leaving only the words hanging awkwardly between them. The social fabric seemed to tighten, balancing on the thin edge of reputation and wit. In the quiet after the clash, Lysander took a slow breath and let the moment settle. The symposium resumed its gentle pace, cups were refilled, and the conversation drifted toward neutral topics. The irony of it all was not lost on him. How fragile, yet how resilient the social veneer could be, like a tapestry gently pulled before the stitches unravel. He watched the familiar faces, some amused, others mildly bored, each unaware of the underlying tension that had momentarily surfaced. The scene, bathed in soft ochre light, felt distant, yet oddly familiar, a reminder that such fractures, small and silent, were woven into the fabric of shared human folly. As the evening drew to a close, Lysander reflected on the night's quiet lessons, how a single careless word might threaten years of carefully cultivated reputation, and how, ultimately, such moments passed like clouds across a still sky. The conviviality settled again into a calm acceptance. The small imperfections, now part of the story behind the masks. The hetera, still nearby, poured herself another sip, and briefly met his gaze, her face a gentle blur of amusement and understanding. In the end, it was the slow, measured breathing and unspoken acknowledgement of human imperfections that marked the true essence of their social dance. A subtle, unspoken resilience amid the quiet weariness of human effort. In the quiet hours of dawn in Athens, Lysander awoke with the soft rustle of linen and the faint warmth of early sunlight filtering through a small window. His daily routine was unremarkable, rising from a woven cot, washing his hands in a basin of cool water, and threading a simple tunic over his shoulders. The weight of social expectation hovered gently, unnoticed except in fleeting moments of glance or gesture. As he prepared to face another day among friends and patrons, whose faces blurred into a familiar sameness, his skill as a hetera occupied part of his mind, along with the subtle sense of belonging that came with it. Yet, beneath this ease, a quiet undercurrent of routine remained. It was a life built on small gestures, on fleeting confidences, on the quiet acknowledgement that nothing was truly out of order, until the day's quiet peace was about to be questioned. The morning took an unexpected turn when a whispered accusation slipped into the marketplace like a shadow, an outsider's voice, sharp and quick, questioning Lysander's honor. The words skittered like pebbles over calm water, spreading doubt among those who knew him well. While he sat silent, the space around him suddenly charged with an unspoken tension. The accusation was neither loud nor clear, merely an insinuation. A faint ripple on his composed surface that threatened to disturb the delicate balance of respect and familiarity he had cultivated. His eyes, gentle and receptive, flickered with the first hints of worry. As he considered the importance of reputation in a society where status was often measured in silent judgments rather than grand gestures. Yet, even in this ambiguity, Lysander understood that resolve would be tested before the day's end. As the news spread, a strange irony settled like dust. How easily a life built on simple routines could be disturbed by mere words. The townspeople, half listening, half absorbing, began to take sides or ponder the faint possibility of truth, their faces marked by mild curiosity and sleepy awareness of their own fleeting concerns. Lysander was summoned before a council of elders, their faces partly obscured by shadows of fading daylight, their voices muffled yet steady. Each man's voice was a measured whisper, weighing reputation against evidence, loyalty against doubt. The atmosphere was thick with the soft hum of debate, punctuated only by the faint tapping of a staff or the shifting of robes. Here, the human comedy played out quietly, an ordinary confrontation wrapped in the slow inevitability of social expectation. In those moments of tense silence, Lysander's expression remained calm as a seasoned figure in a familiar dance. No outraged outbursts, no pleading, just a quiet patience that bordered on irony as the elders questioned his skill, loyalty, and the influence that sustained him. His responses were measured, respectful, touched with a gentle humor that seemed almost unaware of the nerves flickering beneath the surface. The patron's face, shadowed and unseen, about whom little was known, but who held sway beneath layers of reputation, was present in spirit, if not in image. Slowly, the weight of the moment settled into a stillness, like the dust in the sunlight, a fragile pause between accusation and resolution, where human frailty was laid bare and temporarily set aside. It was a quiet testament to the slow, understated rhythm of honor and reputation. In a city caught between aspiration and indifference, eventually the tension eased as the elders, perhaps sensing the unspoken truths in Lysander's calm, dismissed the accusation with silent nods and mild gestures. The ordinary routine resumed: laughter, shared wine, the slow return to familiar faces and simple pleasures that characterized everyday life. Lysander's reputation, fragile as it was, remained intact, not through dramatic defense, but through the gentle persistence of his presence, the soft humor in his voice, and the unremarkable dignity of steady routine. Watching from a distance, one might reflect on the quiet human drama, how honor often hangs by a thread of casual words, and how life continues its slow, untroubled march beneath layers of silent human imperfections. It was, as always, a small story about resilience nestled within the daily grind of social life, easily forgotten, but quietly enduring. As the sun dipped lower behind the marble temples, Lysander adjusted the simple tunic over his shoulders and moved through the quiet courtyard. The faint clatter of cups and whispered greetings blending into the soft evening air. His daily ritual, brushing his hair, greeting neighbors, felt like an unchanging rhythm, a small act of order in the tangled web of Athenian society. For a moment, The air was cool against his skin, and the distant chatter of coin and conversation seemed to pause for the space of his breath. He knew deep down that his standing depended on subtle gestures and whispered reputations, fragile as the last light on a marble statue. And so, with a calm exterior, he prepared himself for the uncertain mood of the evening ahead, the quiet dignity of persistence in a world that often overlooked its own irony. Yet beneath the calm surface, a hint of tension lingered. News of a recent judgment had unsettled the delicate balance that Lysander had carefully maintained. A word, a rumor, and the modest respect he had accrued could dissolve like mist by dawn. He pondered how easily reputation could shift, how the whispers of indifferent friends and indifferent rivals carried weight in the empty spaces of social hierarchy. His daily routines, serving guests, exchanging light pleasantries, seemed trivial now, almost absurd in their fragility. The irony was that so much depended on fleeting perceptions, on the unseen judgments passing silently like shadows across the colonnades. And yet, he listened quietly to himself, accepting this petty chaos as part of life's slow, unending cycle. As the evening shadows lengthened, Lysander reflected on the strange, unspoken rules that kept the social fabric stitched together, rules that relied on appearance, on the soft humor of cataloging one's own reputation. The irony was not lost on him. He, a man of some standing, was ultimately judged by the light in his eyes and the faint sheen of civility in his voice, much like the flickering lamps that lined the agora. He watched a neighbor's laughter drift through the open window, a sound that echoed the distant, blurred faces of prophets whose visages were always hidden, their words intangible. The quiet humor in it all was how such small things could sway the fragile trust woven from daily routines, like threads in a worn tapestry. In this slow dance of status and reputation, Lysander found a strange peace, accepting that certainty was a rare guest in their restless society. Later, surrounded by the muted hush of the approaching night, Lysander sat near a simple tray of figs and bread, the warmth of the day fading into a gentle calm. The bustling marketplace, the lively tavern, all had softened into memory, leaving behind only the stillness of late evening. His thoughts settled on the modest rituals that defined him, lighting a small oil lamp, quietly pondering future days, small acts that, in their patience, reinforced his sense of self. The world outside seemed distant now, and the absurdity of societal rank drifted into a kind of quiet humor, like a joke told long ago, but still lingering in the air, softly humored and just faint enough to be overlooked. Peace, he realized, was built on such simple, unremarkable moments, fragile but ongoing, like the slow glow of twilight. As the sky darkened into navy and shadow, Lysander allowed himself a moment of gentle reflection, contemplating how these routines, simple greetings, cautious conversations, fleeting respect, were the quiet backbone of his life. The verdict that had restored his standing felt distant, almost like a distant echo in the vast silence of evening. It was neither triumph nor tragedy, merely a reminder of the small, often unnoticed ways in which human dignity persists. In these slow, measured hours, he understood that society's fragile rituals, like himself, continued not through grand gestures, but through mundane, resilient acts of persistence. With a faint smile, he looked toward a horizon blurring into gentle darkness, content in the knowledge that tomorrow's routines would quietly carry him forward, indistinguishable from many others in the endless, measured flow of time. In the quiet of Alexandria's grand palace, the newly crowned queen's decision to open her harem was met with a gentle kind of ceremony, where male slaves moved softly through marble courtyards. Lysander, a young and observant attendant, watched over the slow unfolding of daily life, feeling the cool touch of limestone under his fingers and hearing whispers of silk and distant lute strings. The air was thick with warm, woven fabrics and the faint scent of oil lamps, creating a sense of ordinary assurance amid the opulence. In those first moments, everything seemed deliberately unremarkable, yet each small gesture hinted at the intricate rules that governed this miniature universe of power and submission. As days passed, the subtle tensions emerged, men serving as musicians, messengers, or companions, their roles layered with quiet expectations and unseen hierarchies. Lysander, perched at the edge of a conversations, noticed how a slight tilt of a head or the slow flickering of a glance could carry meaning heavier than any spoken word. The palace's splendor contrasted sharply with the dull ache of routine duties, and the male slaves navigated their days with a patience that bordered on inertia, all while the weight of unspoken rules pressed silently around them. Irony lingered in the shadows, where the appearance of harmony masked the constant undercurrents of control, like a calm sea hiding unseen currents beneath its surface. Sometimes Lysander caught himself amused by the quiet absurdity of it all. How the roles they played could be so meticulously scripted, yet subtly disconnected from genuine affection or understanding. The musician's fingers brushed the lyre strings with gentle boredom, and the secret messengers slipped through corridors with half-closed eyes, knowing full well the stories that remained unspoken. The blurred faces of prophets or sacred figures appeared only in fleeting moments of shadow or light, as if their divine presence was meant to be felt rather than seen. There was something quietly humorous about how such a veneer of divinity or importance was sustained by the most mundane of human exchanges, wrapped in layers of subtle irony. Over time, a calm settled like the soft glow of sunset, illuminating the quiet acceptance in Lysander's mind. The palace's walls, gilded yet weathered, bore witness to countless small acts of service and restraint, an unchanging rhythm of daily life. Male slaves, mundane yet vital, moved through their routines with a sleepiness that seemed almost sacred, embodying the stillness of a world that thrived on quiet order rather than chaos. Lysander's gaze often drifted to the distant horizon beyond the city's walls, where the darkness was slowly creeping in, and he felt a gentle resignation shaping his understanding of his place amid the layers of privilege and shadow. The strange serenity in this quiet hierarchy pressed against just beneath the surface of spectacle. In the end, Lysander's quiet observation drew him into a simple reflection on human imperfection, how even in the grandest settings, life moved with a slow, inevitable rhythm, colored by small absurdities and silent hierarchies. The palace remained a place of gilded walls and soft murmurs, where the role of male slaves like him was to serve and observe, neither fully seen nor truly understood. The faces of prophets and figures of authority stayed hidden behind veils of light and shadow, just as the human stories remained tucked away in the quiet corners of history's memory. It was a world stitched together by deliberate calm and gentle irony, a reminder that even the most opulent facades rested on the delicate, often unnoticed, daily acts that quietly shaped human life. In quiet courtyards beneath grand marble colonnades, the male slaves preparing for their roles in Hellenistic royal harems began their slow descent into training. The air was often thick with the faint scent of wool and old stone as they learned the subtleties of court etiquette, how to bow, speak softly, and observe with a humbled gaze. Their days blended into each other, filled with repetitive drills and careful listening, as if history itself was taking a gentle nap. Amidst this, they held onto small, private hopes that their duties might someday be lighter, or perhaps more meaningful. It was a routine of minor sacrifices, carried out in the shadows of shimmering, distant ambitions that seldom saw the light of day. As weeks passed, the initial innocence of their training gave way to a more pressing awareness. Their roles extended beyond simple servitude. The refinement of martial arts, once observed with tired patience, became vital not only for protection, but for maintaining the delicate balance of court power. In whispered exchanges, rivalries softly sparked, one slave's quick glance, another's restless posture hinting at underlying tensions. The courtiers' lives were layered with secrets and half-truths, yet the slaves learned to listen without suspicion and to act with quiet discretion. Irony lingered in the air, for their proficiency in persuasion and restraint often weighed as heavily as their physical endurance. Occasionally, amidst the disciplined routine, a glance would slip, an unintended moment of humor or fatigue slipping through the veneer of formality. Sometimes Lysander, with a faint smirk, noticed the bemused looks of his companions when a chore faltered or a phrase was misheard. The polished surface of their training often masked a tapestry of small frustrations and humor, which they dared not display in front of their masters. These fleeting instances reminded them that beneath the veneers of seriousness, they all shared a quietly ironic humanity, clumsy, unpredictable, and quietly human. The subtle cracks in their facade underlined the ordinary absurdities woven into their daily lives in this strange, distant world. Gradually, the monotony settled into a calming rhythm, as if their labors had become part of the stone, the light, the passing of the days. They moved through their tasks with a measured stillness, mindful of the weight of their responsibilities, yet peaceful in their quiet persistence. The court's complex tapestry of rituals and unspoken rules became familiar, each small act a gentle affirmation of their place in this intricate hierarchy. Occasionally, they found moments of stillness, breathing in the cool, faintly scented air reflecting on their own insignificance and the strange dignity in their endurance. Theirs was a story of minor, lasting resilience, quietly woven into the fabric of the palace's history. In the end, these men often wondered about the meaning of their training, about the secrets they guarded, and the subtle ironies of their lives. Though their faces remained unseen, blurred by the light and shadow, they carried quietly in their hearts the weight of small acts and silent observations. Their existence was a gentle testament to human imperfection, an endless cycle of duty, hope, and restrained humor. As they rested in fading twilight, they understood that history, much like themselves, was patient and slow, always moving, yet never hurried, and in that quiet patience, perhaps, they found a kind of peace, a softly unfolding story worth a gentle, sleepy pause. In the quiet corners of the royal palace, beneath flickering oil lamps and the hushed whispers of servants, male slaves moved deliberately, silent witnesses to the daily rhythm of the harem. Some fetched water, others arranged garments, but all were acutely aware of their place in a fragile social fabric that held secrets just beneath the surface. The air was thick with the faint scent of herbs and warm stones, mundane yet binding in its constancy. For Lysander, a young man assigned to the royal chambers, the routine was punctuated by cautious glances and a quiet sense of belonging and detachment, knowing he was watched yet irreplaceable in small, silent ways. Then slowly, a ripple of tension unfurled, an uncertain message passed in hushed tones, a glance too long, a slip of a word. Rumors of a conspiracy to unseat the queen drifted through the shadows, fragile as spun thread, but dangerous enough to unravel everything. Lysander, with his careful hands and vacant, yet attentive face, was chosen to deliver a cryptic warning, a whisper of danger wrapped in ordinary days. As he slid a rolled papyrus into a hidden pocket, he felt the weight of unseen stakes, where loyalty was as thin as the linen scarves draped over shoulders, and suspicion lurked in the smallest gestures. Irony lay quietly in the task. Here was a slave tasked with espionage, entrusted with secrets that could topple monarchs, yet still bound by the simple routines of daily service. Lysander's outward composure barely betrayed the swirl of uncertainty within. He moved through the marble halls, his footsteps echoing softly on cool stone. Occasionally, he caught the blurred reflection of a figure in a bronze mirror, a shadow of authority flickering behind unseen eyes, and wondered how much of himself was truly present in this dangerous dance. The palace remained indifferent to each twist of human fate, its walls listening silently, like a tired old storyteller. Eventually, calm settled again, like the hush after a distant storm. Lysander's task had been simple on paper: deliver the warning, remain unnoticed. But the internal storm of doubt lingered. Quiet moments spent in the dim light of the storeroom, or by the edge of the fountain, became his small refuge, where the absurdity of his role softened into quiet acceptance. The conspiracy was only whispers now, fading into the background of daily life, and the maddening ordinariness of royal existence continued, with its routines of polishing, fetching, and waiting. The palace, vast and indifferent, kept turning beneath a troubled but peaceful surface, as if human worries were just fleeting shadows on a sunlit wall. Reflecting on it all later, Lysander might have seen the conspiracy not as a grand plot, but as a faint ripple in the steady stream of palace life, an ordinary reminder of the fragile human threads that sustain even the mightiest courts. His role, quiet and anonymous, was a small piece of a larger, unending mosaic of human imperfection, the endless balancing act between loyalty and illusion. The blurred faces of prophets and rulers remained unseen, hidden behind veils of light and shadow, just as the true weight of his actions slipped quietly into the unnoticed pauses of history. In the end, it was a slow, persistent dance, one of subtle gestures, hushed warnings, and the tired patience of a world that moves forward with sleepy resolve. On a quiet night, beneath a sky unlit by stars, the harem's routine had settled into a gentle rhythm, almost unnoticed. The male slaves, often silent witnesses to both luxury and neglect, moved softly through the shadows, their eyes calm and unassuming. It was a time when the palace's quiet comfort masked the underlying tensions, and even in darkness, life maintained its slow, predictable pace. Few paid them mind. Their presence was like the faint hum of a distant breeze there, and yet overlooked. As moonless hours draped the palace in shadow, the familiarity of daily life persisted, quietly preparing for an eventual change that none quite saw coming. Suddenly, the hush of the night shattered a murmur of footsteps, hidden voices plotting in the darkness. Conspirators, cloaked in the shadows of betrayal, moved swiftly to seize the opportunity. The male slaves, who had watched the slow passing of days and nights with tired familiarity, found themselves caught in a moment of unexpected tension. Their usual silence was broken by the distant echoes of a fight, the clash of metal, and hurried whispers. In those inky hours, the palace's fragile sense of security was sharply tested, as everyone sensed that nothing, neither trust nor treachery, remained stable. Amidst the chaos, irony found a quiet corner in a place where one might expect helplessness. The male slaves unexpectedly rose to defend, their movements deliberate and coordinated. Lysander, one of the oldest and most trusted among them, seized a sword, an everyday tool now turned instrument of resistance. As the struggle intensified, their silent observance of palace life shifted into an active gamble against treason. The scene played out in shadows and flickering torchlight, revealing that sometimes those expected to be passive witnesses could become the last line of defense, though, at times, only just barely. The absurdity of it all clung softly to the edges of the night, like a quiet joke. After the clash subsided, and dawn's first light seeped cautiously through the windows, the palace settled back into its slow, ordinary rhythm. The slaves, blood and sweat staining their hands, returned to their subdued routines, treasures of calm amidst chaos. Their faces, blurred by history's distant gaze, showed no triumph, only exhaustion and a humble sense of renewal. Lysander, quietly victorious but contemplative, resumed his modest duties, perhaps pondering how night and day could shift so subtly. The palace's silence became, once more, a canvas of muted human effort, each small act a reminder that life continues. often unnoticed, yet undeniably real. In hindsight, the night's events whisper of human resilience and the quiet ironies woven into daily life within these grand walls. The male slaves, once invisible witnesses, had leapt from shadows into a fleeting moment of heroism, though, like all stories, it faded softly into the background. The story lingered not in grand speeches or heroic legends, but in the gentle, unremarkable memory of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, their faces blurred by time's gentle hand. They reminded us how often the quiet, unnoticed moments are the most human, filled with imperfection, irony, and a stillness that invites reflection in the slow unfolding of history. In the quiet corners of the palace, the male slaves often moved with a sluggish grace, their presence just palpable enough to remind one of unseen threads that held the fragile tapestry of the royal harem together. Once considered mere shadows or objects of utility, some had been noticed silent witnesses to the shifting tides of courtly life. Their days flickered by in the slow rhythm of routine, the air thick with the scent of olive oil and faded silk. The queen, with her steady gaze and distant smile, seemed to see in them a flicker of something beyond their station. Perhaps a reminder of human fragility amid grandeur. Yet nothing truly changed overnight. Only the faint hint of a new understanding settling softly among their silent ranks. As tensions rose with new political pressures, the queen found herself contemplating a different kind of order within her shadows. Perhaps even a quiet act of rebellion. She began quietly restructuring the harem, giving trusted male slaves roles that transcended their traditional boundaries, messengers, confidential messengers, or even unofficial advisors in hushed corners. Lysander, scarred but still standing, listened to these changes with a wry sense of irony. His body bore marks of past struggles, yet he was now tasked with responsibilities that carried an unexpected dignity. The delicate balance of power teetered like a worn scroll, fragile and easily disturbed. The irony hung in the air like an unanswered question, that those least expected might hold the strings of influence in a place meant for their invisibility. The irony deepened as some of the older courtiers glimpsed these shifts, their faces blurred or shadowed, uncertain whether to dismiss or quietly accept these new roles for the male slaves. In the low hum of conversation, they sometimes joked about whether the shadows had learned their place or simply found a new way to linger in the light. Lysander, now more chamberlain than servant, chuckled softly beneath his breath, noticing how history's quiet humor often unfolded in these subtle turns. The palace felt different, calmer in some corners, yet more unpredictable in others. Beneath the surface, there was a strange comfort in knowing that even the smallest change could ripple outward, twisting the old certainties into something unfamiliar, but not necessarily unwelcome. With time, the palace settled into a routine that, while still sluggish, carried a silent promise of stability. Lysander, his scarred face softened from the weight of years, reflected on these minor but meaningful reforms. He observed how the shadows of the former hierarchy still lingered, yet they also faded against the quiet dignity of those now entrusted with new responsibilities. The air grew cooler, the walls more subdued, settling into a peaceful hum that softly echoed the unspoken acknowledgement of resilience. Here, in this slow, almost imperceptible shift, life moved forward like a gentle tide, carrying the memory of what was into a quieter future. The enduring legacy of those who served in unseen ways quietly etched itself into the fabric of the court's old stones. In the end, Lysander's quiet reflection seemed to embrace the subtle irony that all human stories, even the most overlooked, were woven into the fabric of history, tired, fragile, yet somehow persistent. The shadows remained, but their meaning had subtly changed. What once was deemed insignificant male slaves in a harem had quietly contributed to a new chapter of understanding, however faint it might be, as the evening light seeped through the high windows, casting a warm glow on dust-covered relics and waiting figures. One could almost hear the slow, gentle hum of human resilience, an unassuming testament that even in the quietest moments, history continued, softly and enduringly, onward. In the quiet dawn of Spartan society, the hills around Laconia held secrets fewer spoke of openly, yet quietly nourished a small, distinct world, one where kynagos, young male courtesans, moved through the shadows of rigid discipline. Ariston, with his delicate features and soft gaze, watched over the olive groves as the faint light touched his face, beginning an unspoken exchange of trust with his patron. The city's strong, chiseled warriors and stern aristocrats gathered in the morning silence, unaware of the silent bonds that shaped their quiet nights. The social codes were strict but delicate, woven into every gesture and word, unnoticed by most, but carefully respected by those involved. It was a fragile phenomenon, a space where beauty, charm, and power intertwined in a slow, understated dance that spoke more of mutual understanding than defiance. As the days grew warmer and routines settled into an unhurried rhythm, tension arose, not in the clash of armies or the clash of ideals, but in the subtle, unspoken negotiations between Ariston and Lysander. The veteran hoplite, weathered and still sturdy, tried to conceal the faint amusement that flickered when Ariston's youthful enthusiasm nudged boundaries just a little too far. Their meetings rested on a tenuous balance of honor and discretion, where every word and touch was measured in small, deliberate ways, careful not to disturb the invisible harmony. Irony crept quietly into the air. Their relationship straddled the border between societal expectation and personal tenderness, reminding them both that even in such quiet spaces, power could be both tender and fragile. There was a peculiar humor in how their world persisted. Many outsiders, and even some Spartans, remained unaware of its existence. Yet it was woven into the daily fabric of their lives, like a faint, lingering melody. Lysander, with a dry smile, often observed Ariston's innocence, how swiftly youth could transform into a kind of knowing, without shouting or scandal. The old soldier's rough hands and hardened features contrasted with Ariston's gentle, carefree manner, giving the entire scenario a faintly absurd air, like two actors in a play who knew their lines but kept a straight face. Sometimes they simply sat together in the cool shade, exchanging small talk about trivial things, their secret bond quietly resonating beneath the surface, unnoticed by the world. Ironies settled in softly, reminding them that human connections, however unconventional, often thrived in the stillness between expectation and reality. Over time, the routine settled into a calm, almost meditative silence, the kind of stillness that often accompanies deep understanding. Ariston learned the slow pace of patience in his exchanges with Lysander, how to read the quiet signals and trust the unspoken. The hills remained unchanged, the olive trees bearing witness to many seasons of subtle companionship, and the city, proud and stern, watched with a kind of tolerant indifference. Their bond, quiet and delicate, found a gentle peace, a space where mutual respect softened the edges of societal strictness. Under the fading light, their conversations became almost ritualistic, each gesture a reminder of the fragile boundary they dared to maintain. In these moments, the stories of human complexity settled into quiet, enduring truths about longing, respect, and the weight of unvoiced understanding. Later, in the calm aftermath of many seasons, Ariston and Lysander each carried their stories quietly into the future, aware that their bond was a small, nuanced part of a larger world. The hills still echoed softly with the sounds of wind and distant voices, untouched by the intimate details of secret lives. They understood that human connections, however hidden, often reveal their quiet dignity only with patience and acceptance. As they moved through their days, one young, hopeful, and searching, the other weathered, but still attentive, they reflected silently on the strange beauty of their shared space. Perhaps, in small ways, they understood that human stories, simple yet layered, are often best left to rest in the quiet corners of history, and so they continued beneath the steady, indifferent sky, bound by codes and silence, carrying on as quietly as the hills around them. In the softly lit agora of ancient Sparta, Ariston listened quietly as the wine-glazed voices of his fellow courtiers murmured about the coming symposium. It was a ritual, an unspoken exchange of status and subtle favors, where words were often secondary to gestures and shared silences. He learned early that his trade was less about desire and more about delicate economics, favors traded like currency, alliances woven through whispered confidences over garlanded cups. The air bore the faint scent of olives and faintly dusted linen, underscoring the mundane fragility of their carefully maintained networks. It all felt, in its slow rhythm, like a game played as much with patience as with influence, where the unseen debts nestled quietly beneath the surface. One evening, a rival named Philemon arrived at the gathering, his eyes flickering with a quiet determination to displace Ariston's influence. He undercut familiar stories with sharper words, nudging patrons toward his own table, where newer, more alluring promises awaited. Tension seeped into the air, like a subtle tide beneath the surface, as negotiations shifted with the weight of unspoken rivalries. Ariston watched with a calm but wary mind, recognizing the old game of undercutting and alliance sowing, an ongoing ballet of ego and necessity. Yet beneath the surface, the exchanges grew more strained. Patrons began to reveal, with hesitant words and careful glances, the debts they owed, but dared not openly admit. The market of desire was never static, and the quiet costs of love and loyalty danced just below the veneer of civility. Irony settled softly amid their clandestine negotiations, as patrons' hidden debts, sometimes to their companions, sometimes to the city's powerful women, became whispers floating just beyond reach. These debts were rarely measured in coin, but rather in favors, quiet promises, and uncomfortable loyalties. Ariston, observing from his usual corner, chuckled softly at the absurdity, how human connection was often just a ledger of exchanges, etched in unspoken agreements. The delicate balance was maintained with gentle diplomacy, and the understanding that everyone carried shadows of past payments, like a silent weight on their shoulders. In this slow, cautious dance, even the most powerful women of the Agora navigated their own complex wealth, sometimes invisible, sometimes painfully apparent. As the evening shadows lengthened, the the symposia descended into a slower, more contemplative rhythm. Cups of wine needed refilling, and older patrons lingered, their faces blurred by flickering lamplight and shadows. Ariston found himself uncharacteristically still, reflecting on how these exchanges, seemingly trivial, preserved the fragile tapestry of relationships that defined their small, secret world. The irony remained. Behind every smiling courtesan's gaze, there lay a ledger of debts and desires, quietly accumulated over years. Yet, amidst this quiet exchange of favors, a sense of calm seeped into the late hours, perhaps an acceptance that human needs were always, in some way, transactional and imperfect. It was, after all, only human to balance longing with a certain distant, gentle melancholy. Later, in the stillness of night, Ariston mused silently on the invisible economy that cloaked their lives. He realized that beneath the superficial exchanges, each person carried the weight of silent, often unacknowledged, debts, an unending ledger of small sacrifices, fleeting affections, and quiet loyalties. Their trade, like the stones in the marketplace, was grounded in a shared acknowledgement of human imperfection and the slow, enduring nature of longing. The symposia faded into memory, soft as a whispered joke or a fading sunset, leaving only the gentle understanding that behind every desire lay a fragile balance, one sustained by patience, irony, and a quiet, enduring hope for stability amid chaos. In the quiet dawn of Sparta's latest campaign, Lysander prepared for the long march, his armor dull, and his mind occupied by the familiar weight of absence. Ariston, one of the city's esteemed male courtesans, watched the distant horizon where soldiers gathered in formation, their bronze armor glinting softly in the pale light. As Lysander's footsteps faded into the morning stillness, Ariston found himself alone, the half-empty wine cup cooling in his hand, feeling the subtle ache of loss mixed with the mundane certainty of waiting. The city, once bustling with the usual hum of daily life, now seemed paused, waiting for the soldier's return or the strange silence of an uncertain future. Somewhere in the shadows, a messenger's muffled steps announced more news, but for the moment, time itself seemed to breathe slowly, unperturbed. Weeks passed, and the tension in Sparta hung heavy like a thick cloth, wrapping around the streets and the hearts of its people. Ariston's routine shifted as news from the front line brought whispers of defeat and victory, mingling in the air like faint odors of olive oil and sweat. Meanwhile, an undercurrent of intrigue stirred, a secretive plot taking shape behind closed doors, one that sought to turn the city's sexual economy to a new, clandestine purpose. Rumors hinted that some patrons and courtesans might be involved in more than simple companionship, possibly exchanging favors in exchange for intelligence. The idea of espionage, hidden fingerprints in the tapestry of daily life, was itself almost ironic. In a city built on stoic virtues, secrets slipped quietly through the cracks like small, unnoticed shadows. Ariston, caught in the whirl of such whispers, felt the faint thrill of danger punctuate his still, measured days. As the months wore on, a faint smile of irony formed on Ariston's face as he observed the strange theater of politics and pleasure. The courtesans, once merely entertainers, now seemed to bear a weight much larger than their silken garments. They were, perhaps, unintentional carriers of the city's fragile state. Conversations in secluded corners hinted at the absurdity of a society so dependent on intimate exchanges, each touch and word potentially carrying more than just personal intent. The faces of prophets and officials, always blurred by shadow or light, reminded him that certainty was an illusion, especially when dealing in truths hidden behind masks and veiled faces. Calm settled over him like dusk, quiet and unchanging, as if history itself had tired of its own drama, watching patiently for the inevitable turning point. In these slow moments, Ariston found a strange peace in the common human comedy of trust and betrayal. Eventually, the echoes of Lysander's departure and Ariston's suspicions intertwined, creating a somber aura of quiet reflection within the city's fabric. The seasons shifted gently, olive branches thinned. The air grew heavier with the scent of late harvest. And yet life persisted. Ariston, resting in a modest room with a flickering oil lamp, contemplated the fragile line between personal loyalty and the chaos of larger schemes. The world seemed like a series of slow, small acts, a patron paying for a moment's distraction, a spy slipping through the shadows, unnoticed. The faces of all involved remained hidden behind blurred masks of necessity, their motives tangled in muted irony. Somewhere between the quiet planning and the slow hours, a sense of acceptance settled that human stories are rarely grand, often quiet, and forever tinged with the gentle absurdity of existence. Looking back, Ariston understood that even in the depths of political and personal intrigue, ordinary human moments persisted, like shared bread, slow conversations, or the soft sigh of a night breeze. The shadows cast by war and espionage only accentuated the quiet dignity of everyday life, as if the city itself was reminding its inhabitants to find meaning in moments of stillness. Lysander's return might bring relief or new dangers, but for now, life continued at its languid pace, unfolding in small, imperfect gestures beneath a sky that seemed too tired to judge. In this slow dance of human imperfection, the irony lingered. That, beneath the veneer of power and secrets, people simply sought connection in their own understated, fragile ways. And so, in the calm of a waning evening, Ariston found himself quietly contemplative, gently amused by the enduring persistence of life's quiet mysteries. In the quiet, contemplative hours of ancient Sparta, the courtesans, men who navigated the shadowed edges of social life, found their routines weaving between whispered exchanges and subtle glances. Lysander, one of the more prominent figures, returned from a skirmish with a faint splotch of blood on his tunic, his face tired but calm as he recounted the recent battle at Thermopylae. The Patroclus girls, ever watchful and discreet, listened without fuss, their delicate fingers tracing patterns on pottery or adjusting their simple garments, as if the chaos of war was a distant hum behind the walls of their quiet world. Amidst this routine, the unsaid bonds between patrons and courtesans persisted in their own slow, enduring rhythm, grounded in mutual suffering and discreet companionship. It was a quiet, unremarkable day. Yet, beneath the surface, currents of uncertainty flickered like faint embers, hinting at the undercurrents of their hidden society. As days passed, tension thickened in the air like a low tide. Ariston, a courtesan known for his keen mind, received whispers from rival courts, snippets of secrets and scheming, cloaked in shadows and subtlety. His steady eyes scanned the fragile lines of information, weighing loyalty against survival. Meanwhile, Lysander's wounds throbbed slowly, reminding everyone of the costs of loyalty and sacrifice. The quiet hum of their daily lives was now interrupted by the unspoken question: should Ariston reveal what he knew, risking exposure, or keep silent and preserve their clandestine order? The stillness was broken only by measured breaths and the faint rustle of linen, as if the entire society was holding its breath, caught between different tides of allegiance and danger. It was a moment ripe with irony, silent scenes of ordinary life, now tinged with the bitter taste of a looming choice. Ariston hesitated, the expression on his face obscured by a thin curtain of shadow, his mind racing quietly through the possible outcomes. In the corner, a patron exchanged a glance with a courtesan, both recognizing how thin the veneer of calm truly was. The irony lingered in their small gestures, how material comfort and discreet pleasures could be so abruptly overshadowed by the weight of secrets that threatened to unravel their entire world. Yet beneath this tension, a wry humor persisted. Human endeavors, even in shadow, often circled back to trivial routines. The stars outside the small, darkened chamber remained indifferent to their plight, quietly observing from afar. A gentle calm settled as the decision was made, perhaps silently, perhaps in a fleeting nod. Ariston chose to take a step into the unknown, revealing the intelligence he had gathered, not to expose others, but to protect the fragile balance they had carefully maintained. The moment was slow, like a wave cresting before it breaks, and then, with a collective breath held, they moved forward, knowing things would never quite be the same. Lysander, now resting, offered a faint, almost amused smile, as if acknowledging the quiet absurdity of their shared plight. Their clandestine world persisted, threading its way through the mundane and the profound, quietly resilient in the face of historical chaos. The unspoken sacrifice, small and understated, held the potential to turn the tide, if only softly. In the aftermath, the faces of prophets and seers remained obscured in the shadows of history, their whispers lost to time and light. The courtesans resumed their measured routines, their lives quietly unfolding amid the passive hum of the city's distant battles. Reflection settled like a soft blanket over the small community. They had chosen loyalty over fear, and in doing so, had preserved not just their secrets, but their fragile hope for stability. Even as the wider world marched on, the quiet dignity of their existence persisted, an understated testament to human imperfection and the peculiar endurance of small, hidden societies. The day ended softly, with the faint flicker of candlelight and the gentle sound of quiet footsteps, ordinary moments woven into the slow fabric of history, unremarkable but quietly significant. In the quiet, early days of Sparta's renewed acknowledgement, the kynagos, those men who moved silently through hidden spaces, began to find some measure of recognition, however modest. Their roles had always been cloaked in secrecy, their faces washed out by shadow and light. Yet now they were granted a fragile dignity, shielded behind unassuming laws that acknowledged their subtle influence. As the city settled into this quieter arrangement, patrons and courtesans alike lapsed into a routine of discreet exchanges, the mundane hum of daily life masking beneath it a fragile human intimacy. It was a slow, measured beginning, nothing loudly proclaimed, only a silent concession to shared human needs. The air felt softer somehow, carrying the faint hum of distant conversations and the gentle clink of vessels, simple, ordinary gestures of mutual respect, forming a fragile new order. Yet beneath this muted harmony, tensions stirred quietly. The new regulations, crafted by those few leaders who remembered the old chaos with a certain weary irony, imposed subtle limits that sometimes felt arbitrary. Patrons, accustomed to their private privileges, found themselves tempered by the rules, their patience tested in small, inconspicuous ways. An extra step, a measured nod, the slow folding of a cloak. The courtesans, meanwhile, adjusted with a resignation that bordered on bemusement. Human needs, after all, persisted beyond legislation, slipping through cracks like grains of sand. In moments of solitude, some patrons joked about the irony of trying to tame such a wild, intimate economy. Knowing deep down the human hunger remained unpredictable and quietly defiant. The quiet glow of these tentative changes flickered and flickered again, like the steady pulse of an unseen, enduring rhythm. There was a strange humor in how the laws attempted to formalize what was inherently informal, an irony not lost on anyone, especially the older kynegos who watched with dry, knowing eyes. They understood that the architecture of mutual respect was delicate, prone to collapse with a sneeze or a careless word. The patrons sometimes chuckled softly at the absurdity, the idea that they might truly regulate passion or desire, as if they could bottle sparks in clay jars. The courtesans, their faces often blurred by the warm glow of lantern light, navigated these quiet contours of social space with a patient smile. It was almost amusing, this slow, gentle effort to regulate what no law could fully contain, an act of restraint that only underscored human imperfection, like trying to silence a whisper in a vast, empty hall. As time passed, the city's heartbeat settled into a calm rhythm, less driven by urgent passions, and more by the slow, familiar cadence of everyday life. The renewed respect fostered a soft, almost poetic patience. The kynegos, now mentors of sorts, organized small councils in quiet corners, ensuring that the code of mutual respect was upheld without heavy-handed decrees. Their voices, once muted by the shadows, now carried gently through the stone alleys, guiding future interactions with a calm, measured tone. Perhaps there was a lesson in this, that human relationships, however quietly brokered, carried a dignity worth preserving in their mundane patience. The evening air grew cooler, and the city's subdued light seemed to whisper promises of stability, of human connection woven into the fabric of ordinary days. In the slow, lingering shadows of night, those who had once navigated passions now listened to the soft echo of distant footsteps and faint conversations. The story, quietly unfolding in this calmer chapter, suggested a future where respect, fragile yet resilient, would endure beyond hurried needs and fleeting desires. The faces of prophets or higher figures remained indistinct, perhaps hidden in shadow or obscured by a gentle glow, leaving only the human acts of kindness and restraint visible. there was a certain comfort in these slow moments of reflection, a recognition that history, like everything human, moved at its own unhurried pace, sometimes tired, always hopeful, quietly awaiting the next turn of the slow wheel. In the quiet corners of Athens, where the sunlight spilled softly over marble statues and sun-warmed terracotta rooftops, young Lysander's days flowed predictably enough. He wandered through the bustling agora, his thoughts drifting as silently as the older men's conversations about politics and philosophy. One afternoon, he found himself near the shaded colonnade, where a spirited slave named Ariston moved with a quiet purpose, their eyes meeting briefly before Lysander's cheeks warmed with an unfamiliar flutter. It was an ordinary moment, but it marked something subtle and tenderness that defied the usual social margins of the polis. Such relationships, shaped by a cultural tradition, often went unnoticed in the hum of daily life, yet secretly carried a gentle hope for understanding. That day, beneath the fading light, the first faint idea of a bond kindled quietly between them, cloaked in the slow rhythm of Greek evenings. As days lengthened, whispers began to stir among Lysander's peers, curiosity veiled behind polite smiles and lingering glances, about the bond forming between the aristocrat and the slave. Public expectations hovered like a faint cloud, shading their friendship with cautious suspicion. The cultural practice of irasts and iraminos loomed in conversations, often spoken with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. Lysander's parents, absorbed in their political standing, remained largely unaware of the delicate tensions beneath the youthful camaraderie. Yet, the deeper unspoken question lingered in the cool evening air. Could such genuine affection remain pure amidst the scrutinizing eyes of society? The subtle irony was that their friendship, so rooted in tradition, now teetered quietly on the precipice of social acceptance and quiet disapproval. Humor, as it often does, found its way in through small, unintended moments. Ariston's surprised, half-hearted grin when Lysander attempted to recite a rhapsody, or Lysander's awkward insistence that a shared meal could somehow erase the barriers of status. The irony was thickening. Here they were, trying to carve out a private space amid the sharp edges of societal expectations, like two bedraggled sailors lost at sea. People who knew the customs might chuckle at the thought of a slave and aristocrat sharing confidences, as if such bonds were more fragile than they appeared. Behind the scenes, the invisible actor of societal judgment played softly, yet insistently, an unseen blur of faces and shadows, concealed behind the light of the gathering dusk. Still, for those two young men, ordinary routines persisted in their calm, if slightly cautious. companionship. With time, the initial innocence settled into a quiet, contemplative calm. Lysander and Ariston often sat beneath the olive trees after sunset, speaking of trivial things that felt like sacred rituals at dusk. The societal tension remained in the periphery, a faint hum that neither fully acknowledged nor dismissed. Lysander's hand would occasionally brush against Ariston's, a gesture heavy with unspoken meaning, yet carried out with a tentative grace. The society's gaze, distant but persistent, was never far, yet neither boy was eager to confront the inevitable truths framed by their cultural landscape. Instead, they found refuge in the slow, rhythmic passing of days, an unassuming ritual of mutual acknowledgement and quiet patience. In those moments, their bond settled into a gentle, unremarkable harmony, as if suspended between the past's traditions and the silent hope for something beyond them. Reflecting on those days later, some might say the story of Lysander and Ariston was simply another human tale, small, fragile, quietly persevering, played out beneath the indifferent sky of the ancient polis. Their friendship, layered with irony and silence, was neither extraordinary nor entirely accepted, but it bore witness to the persistent softness of human needs and imperfections. Society's eyes could blur and distort the outlines of such bonds. Yet the human heart carried the modest dignity of seeking warmth amid the cool marble of tradition. Perhaps, in the quiet horizontals of those Greek evenings, the most profound stories were not told loudly or in grand gestures, but quietly written in the subtle fabric of everyday life, an enduring reminder of life's gentle, often unnoticed persistence. In the quiet mornings of an ancient Greek agora, Lysander's shoulders carried the weight of small ceremonial duties, his eyes briefly flickering over etched stone tablets that recorded the city's unwritten expectations. The air held a gentle hum of merchants opening stalls, while the distant murmur of philosophical debates rippled through the colonnades. As he and his companion meandered past the marble benches, they found themselves suddenly gazing at a low pedestal, where a wax tablet displayed the codified rules guarding male bonds, an unassuming but strict set of laws that shaped personal allegiances more than public life. For a moment, Lysander wondered if the laws simply echoed the quiet human need for order amidst the chaos of affection and desire. The sunlight softly touched the weathered carved letters, as if easing the weight of their significance into the slow unfolding day, and a realization seeped in that even these old laws had their own gentle, weary logic. Later, with their curiosity piqued, the pair approached a small gathering near a shaded plinth, where an Athenian man, with a face blurred by shadow, declaimed passionately about the liberties granted by the city's statutes, protections and restrictions woven into the same fabric. The discourse grew heated, voices lowered to a hush as ideas tangled like intertwined vines. Some argued that the law civilized and limited the excesses of passion, while others believed it constrained authentic human bonds. Lysander's companion, listening closely, tilted his head thoughtfully, amused by the irony. How something as tender as friendship could be statutorily bounded and scrutinized. The sun moved sluggishly overhead, casting a mellow glow on the interlocutors, their faces unfocused, but their voices carrying a shared weariness for the endless debate about what was right or wrong in love's quiet corners. As midday settled, there was a flicker of humor in the way the laws seemed almost Kafkaesque, an elaborate patchwork of rules that could seem both protective and absurd when spoken aloud. Lysander chuckled softly at the image of ancient scribes fumbling to define what constitutes proper affection, while the cloaked figures in the background exchanged wary glances amidst the mundane clatter of utensils and muted conversations. The realization emerged that these legal constructs, for all their rigidity, could not quite capture the messy, imperfect reality of human tenderness. The faces, often hidden behind veils of indifference or stern authority, hinted at a shared human weakness, trying to hold complexity within simple words. Yet, beneath it all, there was a quiet acknowledgement that these old laws, with all their ironies, shaped the contours of ordinary life, the brief, mundane, yet meaningful exchanges of affection and restraint. In the late afternoon, as the light softened into a golden hue, Lysander and his friend sat beneath a modest olive tree, watching vendors pack away their goods. The laws lay like a faint undercurrent in their thoughts, uncertain but omnipresent in every gesture, every word about who could be seen and how. The city, in its calm, seemed quietly indifferent to the minutiae of such legally bounded relationships. Yet their silent presence persisted, coloring everyday interactions with an invisible hue of authorization and taboo. The faces of the prophets and legislators, now unseen behind veils of shadow or light, were eternally blurred figures who had once set such boundaries with a quiet sense of purpose. Yet, perhaps, with little understanding of the human tide they tried to contain, there was still, amidst the sighing leaves and fading sunlight, a gentle acceptance that human bonds, no matter how regulated, carried on quietly, beyond law and decree. As dusk finally settled, and the agora grew tranquil, Lysander reflected on the slow, oddly familiar dance of law and life. The ancient laws, written upon brittle wax and carved into stone, stood there like silent witnesses to countless human stories of love, restraint, and understanding. Perhaps, he thought, the real lesson was not merely in the written rules, but in the subtle ways ordinary people navigated these fixed boundaries, often unknowingly, with tenderness and patience. The faces of the old prophets and unknown legislators, still unseen, but somehow present in all the careful steps, whispered that human imperfection was a constant companion, even in the most ordered society. In this quiet moment, beneath the gentle sweep of stars, Lysander felt the slow, enduring truth. Life's most subtle laws are written not just in statute, but in the quiet daily acts that hold society together with unspoken grace. In the quiet corners of the marketplace, where the sun cast a gentle warmth over clay stalls and woven fabrics, Lysander and Ariston moved through their daily routine. Their shared glances and subtle touches felt like ordinary threads in the tapestry of a city that valued many kinds of companionship, yet steadily kept a watchful eye on anything that might be considered unusual. The air was filled with the scent of olives and spilled wine, sounds of barter and distant laughter mingling softly. It was an unremarkable morning, marked by the slow rhythm of life continuing as it always did, somehow unburdened by the weight of suspicion. But beneath this calm, a quiet story was unfolding, unnoticed except by those who listened carefully to the hum of human connection. One afternoon, as shadows grew longer and the light dimmed with the approach of dusk, rumors began to ripple through the market like a faint wind. A jealous rival, perhaps motivated by envy or misunderstanding, whispered accusations of impropriety, suggesting Lysander was abusing his influence to manipulate Ariston. Whispers morphed into murmurs, and soon the whispers found eager ears, turning accusations into a collective suspicion. The local authorities, perpetually watching, took note and intensified their gaze, ready to enforce the moral laws that kept society seemingly orderly, but also fragile. The couple's routines faltered, their small gestures scrutinized as if they might conceal something darker. In this dance of social judgment, their bond was quietly tested, weighed against the ever-present threat of disgrace. There was an unintended irony in the whole situation. These laws intended to protect societal morality also cast a shadow of absurdity, transforming everyday kindness into potential crimes. Lysander, once simply a man with friends and ambitions, now found himself making small, hesitant gestures, while others looked on with a mixture of suspicion and boredom. Meanwhile, Ariston's limited rights, a fragile shadow of independence, began to threaten to slip away, their future uncertain under the weight of whispered accusations. The local magistrates, faces blurred by shadow and distance, seemed to perform a ritual as old as the city itself, weighing morality against humankind's simple need for companionship. It was a strange, slow-moving irony. Laws that sought order, yet cast chaos in the quiet corners of human life. The city continued its gentle heartbeat, unaware of the silent struggle unfolding within its walls. Over time, the initial tension settled into a calm acceptance. As Lysander and Ariston learned to move softly through their days, keeping their relationship behind a veil of discretion. The city's quiet streets, once full of whispered judgments, now felt more like a space of tentative normalcy, where human routines persisted with familiar predictability. The accusations, while never fully dismissed, faded into a background hum, like distant thunder muffled by thick walls. Their bond, tested and stretched thin, endured like the slow growth of moss on an ancient wall, subtle, persistent, almost unnoticed. The laws and customs remained, quietly indifferent to individual stories, as the city found a kind of resigned comfort in its ongoing, if slightly tarnished, tranquility. In this pause, there was a quiet recognition that human relationships often persisted beneath the surface, quietly resilient, even if mildly amused by their own fragile laws. As the days moved into a slow, unremarkable rhythm, Lysander and Ariston reflected on the strange, commonplace absurdity of their situation. Society's perceptions, the slow-moving legal machinery, and the unspoken understanding that human connection often thrived in shadows. All these were parts of a wider human story tangled in the routines of city life. Perhaps, they thought with a small, quiet smile, the real morality was simply to remain gentle and unnoticed, like the silent breath between two heartbeats. Their story, simple, and perhaps a little pitiful, was after all just another human effort to find normalcy amid chaos, to love quietly despite the shadows of scandal that sometimes loomed nearby. The city, the laws, the whispers, all kept turning unhurried as human life continued in its slow, deliberate dance. And in that subtle rhythm, there was a quiet, enduring hope for ordinary human endurance. In the quiet corners of the agora, beneath the warm glow of late afternoon sun, stories of companionship lingered like the faint scent of olive oil on stone. Men gathered, their voices hushed but steady, debating the boundaries where friendship and mentorship blurred into a shared understanding of loyalty. It was an era when societal norms quietly shaped what could be spoken aloud and what was kept in the shadowed spaces of daily life. Lysander, a young citizen with a thoughtful gaze, found himself before a modest tribunal, clutching a hope that tradition and reform might soften the edges of ancient custom. The air was thick with the gentle hum of settling dust and the subtle rustle of tunics as everyone waited for the familiar rhythm of justice to unfold. As the proceedings shifted into the more tense moments, Lysander's voice grew deliberate, attempting to weave his argument with threads of respect for the old ways and acknowledgments of recent reform. He spoke of shared pursuits, music, philosophy, training of the body as valued parts of civic life. Yet, he could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the quiet skepticism that still haunted such alliances, even as some magistrates nodded slowly. A hushed murmur passed through the room when he invoked laws that, in recent years, had begun to recognize the bonds rooted in consent and mutual benefit. It was a fragile hope, hanging in the balance between progress and tradition, as the room held its collective breath, waiting for the next word to break or confirm the silence. A ripple of irony passed through the scene when an elder, his face often blurred by the soft shadows, leaned forward with a slow, deliberate motion. He recounted stories of mentorships from the distant past, years, when bonds forged in shared learning and mutual respect had been seen as vital to the polis. His voice was calm, but imbued with a quiet humor, suggesting that perhaps the true value lay not in rigid rules, but in genuine human connection. The crowd listened as he gently pointed out that societal progress often seemed to involve a dance of small concessions, a slow easing into understanding rather than outright rejection. The irony was that this venerable figure's words softened some of the rigid edges, even as they underscored the enduring complexity of human affection. With a calm resolve, the moment shifted into a gentle reflection as the magistrates exchanged glances and the room resumed its languid rhythm. Lysander's case, once fraught with tension, now seemed to drift toward a quiet acceptance, a recognition of the nuanced human stories behind the legal debate. The light outside faded into a softer hue, casting elongated shadows that seemed to echo the slow unfolding of social change. Even the murmurs became less hurried, more contemplative, as people thought about the quiet, everyday acts of kindness and mentorship that filled their own lives. The peaceful atmosphere was tinged with a gentle irony, the idea that these ancient laws, so often rigid and formal, merely shadowed the deeper, more subtle realities of human interdependence. In the lingering calm of the courtroom, a sense of reflective patience settled over the scene as the elders and magistrates considered the broader meaning of companionship. They were not so much passing judgment as acknowledging that human bonds, in their quiet, often unnoticed ways, sustained the fabric of their small world. Lysander's plea for understanding, backed by the elder stories, seemed to blur the line between law and human experience. Just as gentle as a sunset slipping beyond the horizon, perhaps in this slow moment of acknowledgement, the polis learned a little more about the quiet dignity of companionship, even in its most subtle forms, and how, in the end, societal change often depends on these small, enduring truths. The air was still, the silent weight of history resting softly on all present, as the story gently drifted toward its quiet conclusion. In the quiet hours of early reforms, Lysander and Ariston found themselves standing side by side in a modest agora. Their recent legal recognition as companions settling like a soft breeze through the alleys of their city. The announcement had arrived silently, almost unnoticed by the everyday sounds of merchants bargaining and children laughing. Yet it marked a slow shift in what society would tolerate. Their eyes met with a muted acknowledgement, an understanding that change was happening, even if it was only in small, tentative steps. The sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the red-tiled roofs, and for a brief moment the world seemed to pause on the cusp of quiet transformation. It was a time of fragile hope, still weighed down by the lingering doubts of tradition, yet subtly, undeniably moving forward. As days grew into weeks, the tension from old expectations lingered like a persistent shadow, just beyond the edges of their daily lives. Rumors rippled through gatherings, some amused, some wary, and society's gaze lingered with a curious but cautious judgment. Lysander once overheard a group debating whether the law truly meant acceptance or merely tolerance, their voices hushed but edged with irony. Ariston often wondered whether laws truly shifted hearts or merely papered over discomforts that stubbornly refused to change. The irony of their situation, their bond now protected by written rule, yet still subject to disapproval, laid quietly between them, as unspoken as the soft rustling of olive leaves in the evening breeze. It was a quiet reminder that steps forward could feel like small, solitary acts amid widespread hesitation. One evening, the city hosted a modest festival, the flickering lamps casting gentle light on faces that seemed both familiar and distant. Lysander and Ariston stood near a small table, their hands close but not touching, while the distant sound of flutes floated over the crowd. An elderly woman with a face blurred by shadow passed by, her eyes lingering briefly on the pair, but moving on without comment, as if the past's stubborn opinions were slowly slipping away unnoticed. The celebration was neither grand nor silent, but within the modest cups of wine and the shared laughter, there was a trace of irony, what society claimed to accept versus what it quietly still questioned. It was a fleeting scene, gentle and mundane, yet oddly poignant in its understated hopefulness. Change, after all, was happening in the small motions that passed unremarked by most. Gradually, Lysander and Ariston found calm in the rhythm of everyday life, their bond becoming a quiet anchor amid the shifting tides of society's perception. They walked through the city's streets at dawn, their footsteps muffled by the cool, uneven stone. And in those slow, shared moments, the weight of doubt seemed to lift. The law's recognition had made their companionship less vulnerable to dismissal. Yet they both knew that change required patience as much as legislation. Their presence in the market or at a symposium now drew only subtle glances, neither side openly defiant nor fully accepted, just quietly endured. It was enough, in a way, to feel the faint warmth of acceptance spreading, like the gentle glow of dawn after a long, dark night. They let the silence between them deepen, a calm acceptance that life would unfold as it might, softly and inevitably, as seasons turned. A sense of quiet reflection settled over the city, with Lysander and Ariston observing the slow evolution of perceptions in the distance. Their story, once marked by tension and irony, now seemed like a faint whisper in a larger chorus of change, an acknowledgement that even the most faint-hearted steps could leave a lasting imprint. The festival scene, calm and subdued, lingered in memory, reminding those present that progress often moved quietly, almost imperceptibly. In the end, the city's gentle acceptance of their bond hinted at a future where societal perceptions would gradually soften, shaped by the slow, persistent rhythm of small, everyday acts. Lysander and Ariston, with their quiet companionship, became subtle witnesses to societal shifts, flags of hope fluttering softly in a breeze that promised, eventually, transformation. And so life moved on, softly and surely, as it had for many generations before, and many to come.